Hello, everyone. Guten Tag to everyone, and much greetings. Willkommen back to the Teutonic Tangents. And today was kind of my idea, and little not going to be one of my best or prettiest or organized ones. Um, but Tyler, he came through and he got some good notes going for it, and we kind of just decided on good stories for comparison. And today's topic is going to be um, really kind of going to touch back into like martyrs, you know, um, going back to the ancient days, people who died for certain beliefs and just really powerful stories. There's going to be one of them specifically on the Christian side that is not going to be as much of a martyr story as it is just something very touching. It is, of course, a little bit of martyr, but it is something that's basically about the whole religion. It's not really a martyr, it's about more than that. But so to have a little bit of that too, and then we're going to compare. The phase two of this little segment is going to be basically us talking, comparing, and then the last little bit of it is going to be what does that mean for us, kind of going into our daily lives in the 21st century as modern human beings. And yeah, I mean it should be pretty good. It's going to be it's thrown together, but I was really excited, and I was like, let's just talk. And if things go right tonight, on top of that, we're gonna be uh, cramming in this bit, and then we're probably actually going to be releasing our first potential enlisted episode.
It's
So
about damn time.
yeah, I know. So fingers crossed, baby. So we're gonna be trying to crank that out as well. I'm pretty excited for it. It'd be good just to whoop some ass with the Wehrmacht and
Hell yeah.
get some ya los gets. And so I guess just to try to get this video cranked out for about 30 to 40 minutes. I guess let's go ahead and begin. And Tyler, while I pull up my notes,
Yes.
I want you to start with yours. And then
Oh no, I
I'm
got put in
going
the
to,
spotlight.
yep, you gotta start with yours. And then I'll have mine. I need to pull up my notes on this tab real quick. So Tyler, begin.
So before I dive into mine, we could either do this where I go through both of mine and then you go through both of yours. But I'm thinking it would be better if I start with, because my first one's going to be talking about Simon Peter or Saint Peter. So I can do that one and cover that, and then you can cover your first one, and then I'll cover my second one, and then you cover your second one. We kind of go back and forth. I feel like that would be a little better for structure. What do you think?
Absolutely. So going back and forth on each individual one.
Yeah, I'll share one story, then you share one story, then I share another one, then it goes back to you sharing another one.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll keep it to that, and we'll um pretty much wrap it up in phase two of comparing the overall message and themes, even though they're separate religions and different cultures, really considering one's um different parts of the world. So I think it'd be really cool. So I like that. We'll keep it to that.
All right. So as I already said, my first one is going to be Simon Peter. And a little background for Peter is he was a fisherman. He was one of Jesus' first disciples. He was in his inner circle with James and John. His original name was just Simon, but Jesus gave him the name Peter, meaning rock. He was a fisherman. He was known for being bold, impulsive, and passionate, and known for being very loyal. And this next section, Cody might not know some of this stuff, but I found it interesting, so I'm gonna include it. These are some key moments before martyrdom, before he died. And one of my favorite stories with Peter is that he walked on water. I don't know if you knew that he walked on water or not, but
Mm-hmm.
I just like that story because he was walking on water with Jesus, and then he got distracted because Jesus told him to keep his focus on him and he would be fine. And then he got distracted by the storm around him, and then he just started sinking.
I I love that. I do love that. There will be a theme. I even told Tyler. Um, there's some beautiful things that I remember, and I think as we go into episodes in the future, just like side notes is just to be clear, I think I've developed it a lot because of our strong brotherhood, because we had like our little, if you even want to call it a clash, but our little mini thing where we didn't talk for a bit months ago because of the whole religious split. But I've kind of found that since coming back together and just not like, being weird about it. And it's kind of, really hearing it from like a brother's standpoint, you know what I mean? Hearing these stories and hearing the passion and the language and the things you learn. I think it's beautiful. So you'll see a theme where there's a lot of them that are very touching to me. One of the last stories that Tyler will go through on this episode, for me, I even when I was a kid, before I became pagan, it was a very touching one, and and it's still touching to me too. It is kind of a beautiful thing. You'll see even in death some of the things that are said and recorded that are said. So, um, but yeah, I love that stuff. Continue. Sorry about that.
You're good. So, Peter walked on water, then he doubted and started to sink. He declared Jesus as the Messiah, and he denied Jesus 3 times before the crucifixion. And he was later restored by Jesus. And the theme there is failure, redemption, and purpose. So, a little more backstory for Peter. He was a major leader in the early church. In Acts chapter 2, he actually preached at Pentecost. I'm assuming that's probably where the Pentecostal church comes from. And there were 3,000 people saved whenever he was preaching there. He performed miracles. He was an apostle. So he's one of the people that Jesus sent out on his behalf to heal the sick and the lame and to perform miracles on his behalf. And he faced repeated persecution and imprisonment. And that is where we lead into what actually happened to him towards the end. So, going into the martyrdom of Peter, he was traditionally believed to be killed under Nero in Rome around 64 to 68 AD. And he was crucified upside down. They were going to crucify him standing up like they did with Jesus, but Peter said that he didn't want to be crucified and he didn't want to die in the same way that Jesus did because he didn't think he was worthy enough to. So he requested that he be crucified upside down as an act of humility and respect for Jesus because he thought he wasn't worthy to die in the same way. And that wraps up my story for Simon Peter.
I think it's I think it's pretty. The way it's like pretty like goddamn, kind of like a badass final like little thing, like even in the end, you kind of just you're so devoted to the entirety of the belief, and it's like this understanding, this like sane devotion, like like I'm not as worthy as Christ, and you are willing to literally to put yourself in a worse situation, just to essentially prove that. And that as just one example, one fine and beautiful example of just a lesson for everybody listening. Really strong devotion, um, and it's going to be a theme throughout this. Even in the face of death. So I really like that one. It was a good one. So mine, it'll go. It's all the same theme towards the end. It involves death. Pretty much all these involve death. Just spoiler alert. But um, I will say mine goes slightly slightly a different vibe, but nonetheless, it's still essentially a lot of dedication. A lot of people listen. They might know a story of him. They made a shitty, it was shitty but still cool because it's remembering somebody. But shitty movie, but about King Radbod, and he was a king from roughly like 648 719. And Phrygia, he was a Phrygian king. In this time there was a lot of heavy um, Christianization going. You had one of the most saddest things to happen was the Saxon Wars that were also going on like constantly. A lot of these events you'll see there's a theme that happen. It's kind of in the Vendel period, basically, like in that little period between the migration area, the formation of the Anglo-Saxons, all these other peoples and tribes, and between the Viking Age. And pretty much most people believe it's kind of obvious too that what led up to the Viking Age was essentially all the shit that was starting to happen in the south of Scandinavia. And this is another example of it. Saxon Wars, there's a lot of slaughter, there's a lot of bad shit that happened. Even the ancient tree that was written about and talked about in those times, Irminsul, supposed to be a very tall tree, almost resembling like Yggdrasil, a sacred tree, was cut down by Charlemagne and the Franks. And the Saxons fought super fucking hard, and I'm proud of some of my lineage. Really, a lot of my lineage on my maternal side, basically all German. It goes back to that. So I mean, I have a lot of stuff that goes back to that, and those people fought really hard. And but in the end, if anybody knows, eventually the Franks won, and then came to like a slaughter of thousands of Saxons. And yeah, it's a very brutal conversion. Now, King Radbad of Frisia, these kind of events, and where his age and all that, his time was 648 to 719. Again, it's kind of right before like Viking Age. This is another event that essentially formed a lot of what happened in the Viking Age. Because if anybody knows, the Franks and shit, people in Francia and like Paris and all that, they got hit the hardest. Like the raids all through there was, fucking ruthless, and there's kind of a reason for that. But so King Radbod ruled Phrygia from about 680 AD until his death in 719, and he was the last independent ruler of Phrygia before it was subdued and converted by the Christian Franks. Radbod is celebrated as a powerful warrior and leader, always energetic and constantly fighting another battle for the good of his people. He was said to have repulsed Christianity and its proponents out of Phrygia during his early reign, since his predecessor had allowed the foreign faith to sink its claws into his kingdom years earlier, adding to the gravity of Radbad's reputation. It is reported that he made the entire Frankish kingdom tremble in fear when they heard that he was assembling an army, even near the end of his life. His most well-known victory involves defeating Charles Martel himself at Cologne, that's in Germany, in 716, 3 years before his own death. The most important tale of King Radbad's life, however, was when he was nearly baptized by Frankish Christians. While the reasons for this are unknown, King Radbad nearly accepted the desert faith for himself and his people. Wolfram, a monk, had set up the baptism. When King Radbad asked him where his ancestors were, Wolfram replied that they were burning in hell, but that heaven contained the souls of many fellow Christians. This remark quickly helped King Radbad make up his mind. He then rejected the baptism in Christ wholesale and said, I would sooner spend eternity burning with my ancestors than in paradise with a pack of beggars. From then on, and until the end of his days, King Radbad courageously and loyally stood with the Aesir. His faith in the gods of his ancestors gave him enough strength to go shot for shot with the Frankish Empire for a time, even going so far as to defeat Charles Martel. So, this one, like I said, pretty big different vibe. Like I said, this was in a time the kind of the whole vibe of everything we're doing is essentially devotion and kind of like strength, in your belief. The different vibe here, obviously, is that this is pretty much like this is retaliation against Christianity. Um, but understanding that though is, in this time it was pretty brutal. I think, fortunately for the Anglo-Saxons, which pretty much my whole paternal side stems from there, England, Anglo-Saxons. Um, their conversion was a lot smoother. Um, it was a lot, gentler, and there really wasn't any issues there. But on the continent, um, I mean, the way that shit was spreading, it was very violent. So I think a lot of people, with that, um, it was essentially that's kind of the way you retaliated. So just keeping that in mind. But the overall vibe is devotion, and strength, kind of even in the face, because the Franks were powerful. The people who were, Christianizing early. Um, the Franks, the Holy Roman Empire, all these things, and I think kind of having that strength, even whenever um, you're not at your strongest, um, just to kind of sneak a bit of like I guess modern interpretation, um, just saying, imagine, I don't know, something like martial law gets put into effect, and you imagine. But yeah, you imagine that shit fucking happens, and you got people fucking trying to force things on you, like, no, these are the laws, these are this, these are that. You're just minding your business. You know what I mean? Like, you just got your own family going on, you got your own place, and they're like, no, even if you're not bothering anybody, you're not, doing anything, but they start to impose that on you because they're stronger, more numbers, more powerful. It's you kind of got a choice. You have your values of your home, and you stand for certain things, and um, or you could back down. But I will say, a really good Norwegian that I like to watch on YouTube is Norse Magic and Beliefs. He did a really solid video on it, and I really respected it because he said what I've converted in the Viking Age, and he brought up a good point where it's like, if I had a family, yes, if I was by myself, then no. And so I think that's when things do get complicated, because there's things of, if anybody gives a shit about their family and they know they could get their family killed, that's pretty tough. It's a pretty tough decision, and so there's logical reasons, but I think also understanding, um, I think it's also good understanding that there's many ways, you could, trick the system. I mean, even a lot of people back then too, they didn't necessarily actually convert. If anybody knows when conversion happened, a lot of people are still practicing in private. Even like Icelandic law still said, yeah, you could practice in private, just not out in the open. But I don't know, if I was to get asked that question, that's the point I'm going at here, like even with a family. Um, it's really tough, and it can kind of get selfish, but like what I would tell them, of course, could be different than what I do. But if they somehow, they kind of know everything I do, all this and that, I think, you know, for me, just because of finding this faith, and finding um, such strong, deep roots in it, and feeling things in it, um, for me personally, I would probably not convert, just simply, you know, just simply because of the fact of, um, I guess, whenever you really think about who's watching you, for anybody who ends up watching this one, whether you're a Christian and it's God, Christ, you know what I mean? These are people that you want them to notice you, you want them to notice for the glorious things you do. And, you want to be remembered for that. And so that way, when you go to your day of judgment, you want a lot of like good, honorable things to be said about you, that you weren't like a scumbag. And I feel like it's the same way for me for me, with my ancestors, with my gods. I know not all the gods are going to notice me, but um, for me, the thing that I think about most of all is my ancestors. Like there's accumulation of many spirits and ancestors within me that I descend from. That make me who I am. So for me, in this day and age, where things are kind of going back to that, where things are starting to throw off vibes of control, I want to have my roots and my heart in a really strong place, as King Radbad did. He did his whole life when he was young, and like I said, the Franks still were scared of him even when he was an old fucking man. Probably barely pulled the sword out of his sheath, and he's still just trying to whoop ass. And like, oh fuck, he's raising an army to retaliate against us. So,
He built up a hell of a reputation. That's for sure.
he did. Yeah, and I think it's beautiful. I think it's about, you understand that this life isn't permanent. You understand there's something after, and even King Radbud saw that, as he said he'd rather burn in hell with his family, because people were, had the audacity to say that. I mean, I'd feel the same way. I'm like, all right, fuck you, because they were like, he literally asked him like, oh, where are my ancestors, and they're like, oh, they're burning in hell. You tell me that, you're gonna tell me that, right before you're trying to convert me. I'm like, oh, fuck you, yeah, I'm gonna go there with them. So, like I said, different vibe, but like both sides, you know what I mean? Because even God wants that, for anybody who follows God, he wants that too. He wants a strong devotion like that, you know what I mean? Where you'd be willing to kind of die for that belief. And it's kind of the same thing with my ancestors. They'd be very proud to see that if I was willing to die for that. So I feel like that's the sweetest way I can wrap that one up, with it being such an opposite vibe of like anti-Christian retaliation. But so there you go, lessons for both. But yeah, so that's my first one. So Tyler, pop us off with your next one.
I will go ahead and say that for both of our stories, they kind of have different vibes going on with both of them, but we did our best with it. We did our best we could. Uh, my next story is gonna be over John the Baptist, or John the Baptizer, the cousin of Jesus. He's another famous martyr on the Christian side, and actually, funny story. I don't get emotional a lot, but whenever I first read his story, really every time I read his story, it makes me pretty emotional. I don't know why, it just hits me. So let's dig into it. He was the cousin of Jesus. He was born with a divine purpose announced before birth, and that purpose was to pave the way for Christ, to prepare the way for him. His job was basically to go out, baptize people, spread the word of Christ before Christ actually came and announced himself. That way people would be prepared. He lived in the wilderness for, I don't even know how long. I think it was basically his whole life. I know he was down there by the Jordan River baptizing people. That's where he baptized Jesus at. And he lived on a diet of locusts and honey. I do remember that.
Mm.
So he didn't get regular food. It was literally locusts and honey. Which I don't
God
know how
damn.
the hell he survived off of that. I probably couldn't even make myself eat that. But
Yeah.
and what he was known for was, other than baptizing Jesus, was his diet of eating locusts and wild honey and wearing camel hair. So he didn't have normal clothes either. He wore camel hair for his clothes.
Damn.
And his key role, he baptized Jesus. He publicly identified Jesus as the Lamb of God. And this was also the bridge between the Old Testament prophets and the New Testament, the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. That's where it all started at. So as far as his personality goes, he was bold, confrontational, and uncompromising. So he was very steadfast in his beliefs. He would call people out if he disagreed with them or if they disagreed with him. He wasn't afraid to argue his point. He called out sin publicly, even with powerful people, which got him in a lot of trouble, but he still did it anyways. Like mainly the Romans, and then the Romans threw him in prison. He was arrested by Herod. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. King Herod is the one who arrested him. And Herod arrested him because he condemned Herod's unlawful marriage to Herodias. There's a sinful marriage. And he caught him out on it, and he didn't like that. And he said, okay, I'm going to throw you in prison.
Mm.
And he spent a lot of time in prison. I don't remember specifically whether Jesus ever got to visit him in prison, but I know that John sent word to Jesus via Andrew, one of his disciples, to ask if Jesus was going to come visit him. And I think he had some stuff going on or something. It's whenever he was working on gathering his disciples and everything and building up his following. And he was executed by beheading.
Mm.
Yeah, and that was because it was a request from Herodias' daughter after a dance that she did for King Herod. She was trying to gain his favor. She wanted John dead and wanted his head on a silver platter. So that's exactly what they did. And also, the last words of John the Baptizer were really simple. He was just proclaiming that his mission was accomplished. He said, "The way of the Lord is prepared." And that was his mission from birth. He succeeded in that. And yeah, that was it.
Mm. I do. I like that one. Um, yeah. Trying to think here because as we've been going too, I've been thinking about we'll have to do another episode for something like this because I've been looking at some of the notes while you were talking about him, and I've noticed about how even modern. I believe you said you also had a modern book, didn't you, about modern martyrs?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was looking on here on my notes. It's got like a full thing of like all these different people. There's um, of like there's different days that are remembrances for them for they died for the name of um, Germanic paganism and stuff. But I've seen a lot of modern ones, like even as soon as like they died just like a few years ago, and um, I think stories such as the one you're telling, um, I think it's really cool how um, I think it's really cool how much it still stays in people's hearts, and how much it influences them that you still see all kinds of stuff, you know, to this day. I mean, I think for the Christian side of it, there's much respect to it because obviously, um, Christians going out to the Middle East, it's kind of it's a really rough thing, bad shit happens unfortunately, and a lot of people go out there with good things in their heart and they want to, you know, do good by God and do good just by other people, and just to say it, they get their fucking heads cut off for it, because they're considered infidels um, by Muslims, So, I mean, this is something that's happened for a long time. I mean, many times Christians have gone into those lands. It's how Muslims have always seen it, um, but no, you still see that even to this day, like missionaries and stuff going to all kinds of different countries. They try to do things right for God. Um, without much support, and you see some of the time bad things happening to them when they go to these places out east, in the Middle East, into Africa and stuff. So, yeah, had me thinking of that. Whenever you're bringing up, he got his fucking head chopped off. Had me thinking, unfortunately, how till that shit happens. You know what I mean? A lot of Christians, um, mainly, that happens with. So I'd have to say much respect there because, um, I'm sorry we somehow attract Muslims, but um, even when I was a Christian, you know, I have a lot of kind of disagreements, putting it lightly. I'll just say I hate Islam. I really do. It's a very even in the Bible. I've learned this too. It describes those people, those exact people. They're gonna be like a wild ass, like a donkey. They're untamable, and they're very. It's you either if you're an enemy of Allah, you must be killed. You know what I mean? And you were talking to me about that too. So it's so even when I was a Christian, I always had this thing of like I had aspirations where I was like, all right, I'm gonna go into the military. I'm gonna be dealing with these people out there, and I knew what it was gonna be. Like I knew like these people have such a hatred for Christians. You know what I mean? Like you don't really like the reason why a lot of Muslims might die is because they choose it. They fucking blow themselves up. They do whatever it takes to kill the Christian. But yeah, much respect to a lot of Christians. Both just people just find themselves over there, but also just people and missionaries who travel the world to go help people in like third world places. And you know, in that sense, there's still a lot of people who fucking like die martyrs. It's some really, really graphic and bad videos of Christians just slowly getting their head just sawed off by a Muslim out there, and they record it and they try to send it to where people here can see it. Um, um, so I think a lot of those stories you're sharing are very touching because I will say the reason why it's a different vibe, which I kind of like the different vibe, kind of shows different sides to it. It kind of shows on your side of it where these men they're not armed. You know what I mean? They're not talking like military stuff here. We're talking men and then the divine. You know what I mean? Just uh, doing things for God, trying to do religious things, and essentially they die for it. And and they're fine with dying for it. They died for God. It's like dedication, being a martyr. And my side of it is definitely more. Not all the stories. There's some really sad stories, unfortunately, but a lot of them are militant kind of ones where it's like retaliation, fighting back essentially, um, and kind of dying for it. But um, just to say, because I'm reading a lot of from mine that are the vibes are much more retaliation against Christianity. I want to put it out there. Definitely much respect because there's still a lot of Christians who die on foreign soil, for God. So, but it just had me think of that. It still influences many people to this day, And I know you haven't got to read much of it yet, but it'd be really cool to do an episode one day of you kind of talking about modern martyrs and stuff. We can compare that. So, um, yeah, I really like that one.
There is one thing that I want to add on to about the whole Islam thing. Even as a devout Christian myself, the Bible says, God says that we're supposed to love our enemies, but I also find that very hard, specifically when it comes to Islam. It, just like you, I have a lot of disagreements, and that's a very light word for it.
Yeah.
I just don't know how the hell they do some of the stuff that they do, and they feel okay doing it. I don't get it at all.
Yep.
And I actually had a copy of the Quran. I got it for free just because I wanted to read it and try to understand it a little bit. It didn't go too well. and I might get some backlash for this, but I burned it in a bonfire just because of all the bad shit that I was finding in it.
Yeah.
But now that I put that out there, I'm probably gonna get a bunch of hate for it. But like, oh, why is a Christian doing this? He's not supposed to be doing that. But I don't know. It was just my thoughts and
I,
my feelings, and I just did what felt right to me.
yeah. I mean, as you should, you know. I mean, it's like I think with something as extreme as that, there's really only one way to handle that, and that is to understand them as an enemy and a threat. You know, treat everything that's associated with them as a threat and as something evil. 'Cause it really is. Like they might not think it, but you know, they really are. Like they just believe whoever's an enemy. You know, whoever doesn't believe in Allah, fucking kill them. And
Oh,
it's like,
it's
what the
not
fuck
even
is wrong?
just that. The other biggest problem with Islam for me is the whole underage marriage thing.
Mm.
Like take their prophet Muhammad and Aisha. Aisha was like 6 years old whenever Muhammad married her, and they consummated the marriage whenever she was 9 years old. And they somehow think it's okay. But yeah, there's gonna be some people in here with pitchforks and torches.
Hey, I mean, maybe not. People are awakening for sure. I think more people are getting sick of things. Um, you know, I think people because you know, for like there's a huge just like it's kind of on the back end of it, but it's still what's happening. But it's like the whole phase of like if you were a straight white, you know, Christian male, you know, it's kind of like you really do have it. You really do still have it the hardest time. You know what I mean? Because it's just kind of like it's seen as like a threat. You know what I mean? The days of just being a strong uh, white male who's like Christian. You know what I mean? Is not of some foreign religion. You know what I mean? Is like seen as a threat. But it should just be seen as strength. You know what I mean? That should be a good thing. You know, because it's a strong white male with good morals, and you know he's a Christian. You know what I mean? You look at some of the spectacular things, even when Europe, like when because it's an Abrahamic religion, but when it spread into Europe, some of the marvelous things that were done by Europeans who were Christianized, it's it's insane, you know, like some of the cathedrals and some of the amazing buildings that were just built for God, and that you go and you see like it's fucking massive and it's beautiful when you go to Europe, you know. So it's like I just think some of the things that were I don't know done by white straight males who are Christian, you know what I mean? But it's just seen as a threat. It's like this bad thing, and I think it's on the back end of it, you know, because I think people starting to see more in the news, like people that are immigrants from there, some of the bad stuff they do, um, to people here. Like the more and more we bring them, like bring those people in. So I mean, yeah, I mean, yeah. Again, if it hurts anybody's feelings, it's just kind of like, you know, if you are somebody of Middle Eastern descent, or you know, you're Muslim, your book says it. Sorry to say, but your book literally says it. You know, take it up with the fucker who wrote the book. You know, and said Allah said to do this. You know, or consummate the marriage with a 9-year-old fucking girl. So yeah, take it up with that. Yeah, your religion sucks. It's ass.
Yeah, I don't know if you know what consummating means, but that is absolutely disgusting, and there's no way to justify that.
Yeah, it's absolutely disgusting. Anybody who doesn't know what that means, just look it up.
Yeah, we can't
Yeah,
say that on here,
yeah, I'm not gonna say that on here at
especially
all.
given the context. But
Yeah. So yeah, my respect, even as a Germanic pagan, always much respect to Christians who have gone over to that soil over there and have unfortunately died and basically become martyrs, to Muslims cutting their heads off. So yeah, we'll have to do an episode on that one day. I'd be fine honestly with just an episode, even just Germanic paganism aside, touching into
I actually have 2 books that I'm going to have to
oh
start reading.
yeah.
So they were both sent to me by the same company. What was the name of it? I don't remember. I don't know. Oh, it's on the fucking book. The Voice of the Martyrs. That's the company that sent me these books. And this is one of them. It's called Extreme Devotion. It talks about modern day martyrs, their stories, backstory, what happened to them, all that stuff. And they also sent me a Bible. I got both of these for free. It's the Pray for the Persecuted Bible. And basically, it has different, like, scriptures in it from the Bible. And it also has stories of different modern day martyrs that align with the scripture stories.
Mm.
So I'm going to have to read through both of those and get a list going. And I'm sure I'll have a lot to talk about with it.
I think you will. Yeah, because I mean, on my end, I got the culture of the Teutons, and I'm like, he's got I know you're a reader. You're definitely a reader. You got a lot of knowledge and shit. So I'm like, we gotta get him just touching and doing a book review, like a chapter review on each one of certain things. I think that'd be cool. So maybe if you get a chance, um, and we'll set it up. We'll do a full episode on chapter reviews for your book as well, because I think that doesn't get enough respect too. Like as much as this video goes along, it'll be kind of repetitive stories of some of these will be like, in the time Germanic pagans being persecuted. But just want to put it out there. Much respect to Christians for the persecution, of course, that's happened with them. So yeah, it'd be a really cool one to do. We'll have to do that. So you got to get to reading.
Yep.
To keep things rolling here, my next story here. I really love this one. I actually sent it to Tyler when I first found out about it, and I was disappointed I never knew about it. But it's kind of set right after the migration era, early Anglo-Saxon, England. It wasn't even called England then. Still would have had the Anglo-Saxon heptarchy, sorry. But his name is King Anfrith. I like that last part of the name. It's literally spelled Eanfrith. Frith. So literally just Anfrith.
We just did an episode about
like
Frith. I just uploaded it.
It's an episode. I fucking love that. Cool. Literally, and then it's so close. I think that still might be. Anglo-Saxons had different spellings, but like literally the name I like using, Arnwulf, for a lot of things. It's literally the eagle wolf, and it's literally like the first part of it. So it might be like eagle piece or something like that, like eagle kin piece. I don't even know, but anyways, it's really cool. But his name was King Anfrith of Bernicia, and overall he was born like around 590, and he lived to about 634. So he was a Saxon king in what is now Lowland Scotland. Because if anybody knows, back in those times, Lowland Scotland wasn't really Scotland. It was basically Northumbria. Anglo-Saxons kind of pushed into there. During the initial wave of conversions to Christianity in England, his father was Aethelfrith, or another Frith, also true king of both Bernicia and Deira, or Daira. And if anybody doesn't know, Bernicia and Daira were both kingdoms that were split off, and they basically make Northumbria. And it says, the two halves of the kingdom of Northumbria. He was killed in 616 when, this is Ethelfrith, Eanfrith's dad. He was killed in 616 when Eanfrith was in his mid-20s. When he was killed, Eanfrith's uncle, Edwin, then took the throne of all Northumbria. Then Anfrith was sent north to live in exile among the Scots. While living in exile with the Scots, he was forced to either be baptized or find a new home. Unfortunately, in a moment of weakness that can almost be excused, he chose to briefly forsake his troth with the Aesir and be bathed in the name of the foreign Christ. He also married a Pictish Christian princess and had a son with her, further stepping away from the light of the Aesir. However, when his uncle Edwin was killed in battle by another Saxon king, the Ausotruar Penda of Mercia, Anfrith seized the opportunity to claim both of his birthrights, the throne of Bernicia and his relationship with the Aesir. The Venerable Bede specifically states that the King Anfrith immediately renounced and lost his faith in the foreign Christ. I remember this part. Let's see. After returning to his throne and picking up the torch of Ausotru, King Anfrith sought peace negotiations with Cadwallon, the Christian Celtic king who had assisted in defeating Edwin. Cadwallon agreed to meet King Anfrith for peace negotiations, so King Anfrith took a small retinue of only a dozen soldiers. When they arrived to meet Cadwallon, he had them trapped and killed almost immediately. Even though King Anfrith arrived with the honorable intent of keeping the Frith, there's that word, Frith, and working towards peace. Even when approached nobly and with the best intentions, the Christian snakes ambushed and killed at least 13 Ausotru men simply for keeping their loyalty to the Aesir intact. This unfortunately ended Ausotru in northern England until the start of the Viking Age. But for a brief moment, King Anfrith of Bernicia restored the Saxons' native faith of Ausotru. He cared not for the material or social consequences, as he had while in exile. He cared only to do what was right by his folk and by his gods. So yeah, this is actually so far my favorite one, I would say, just because it kind of resonates with me. It's Anglo-Saxon England, and I always kind of like to know about that more. Like, there's a lot of stuff that happened on the continent. You have the Viking Age, the whole rebellion and wearing Mjolnirs and retaliating against Christianity. You have all of that, but like nobody kind of talks about all the smaller stories of some of the sad things that happen, like within England, because it really was generally a pretty peaceful conversion. They just found smarter ways to convert the people. They didn't want to, do things violently, but there's still things like that. So kind of shows where, unfortunately, in those times, you know, even if you were an honorable person, if you were just simply of another faith, if you were still a pagan, kind of really to a Christian, in those times it was kind of seen as you morally, or you just were somebody else, like there's just, I don't know, there was no balance with it. It's like you were this or that. So it kind of shows moments of weakness, in it's like a very tumultuous time. Like this is a time when like countries were forming, like kingdoms were forming, and like Christianity was like spreading rapidly. So it was like you either fall with it and you gain power and you keep your relations with other kings who are Christian, or you kind of lose out on that. And like sadly in those times, to be pagan was to lose your life. And he he did his best. There was also a lot of plotting and scheming. Literally his own uncle like took the throne after his dad was killed and kicked him out. So there's a lot of that too in that time, because again, kingdoms were forming, so people were just rapidly like thinking of shit. And then you try to do the right thing, you know what I mean? I think it kind of, I like his story too in a sense, because like I said, I answered that question earlier. I think even with a family, I would have to not fall in line. I feel like I'd have to be, killed for it, for my belief. I feel like I would. But and he kind of did the same thing. He had he had weakness a little bit, of course, but it's a very complicated thing. He's trying to have a family, things like this. He's trying to kind of gain some kind of power back, I guess, gain anything back. And you can't really do that, but imagine it's harder if you're a pagan, everybody else is Christian, all the lords, but he kind of regained his strength, you know what I mean? And he tried to restore it in Anglo-Saxon Northumbria. He was trying to keep it. He was trying to be among the last people. And you don't really hear, I feel like, too much of people getting killed in Anglo-Saxon England for that. Most of the time it was just conversions. They were like, oh, well, other kings are doing it. But for me, he's a very good symbol of trying to keep, to the traditions of his people for as long as possible. And unfortunately, the Celts, because if anybody knows about the Celts, all of them were pretty much converted by the Romans to Christianity very, very much earlier. And to them, they didn't like that. And essentially, even an honorable peace thing, if anybody knows anything about any kind of war, there's so many rules in war. There's like a lot of supposed to be honorable things. Um, to kind of break that. Even like enemies, because if anybody knows about the geography of it, you know, Anglo-Saxon England and the north of it, the Picts and all these people, those are enemies. There's really never any really peace. There's all constant enemies, and so when it says he was trying to keep the frith on the peace, we talked about that in our episode 1 of Frith, of our episode 1 of Culture of the Teutons Frith. Even how enemies, I read from a saga, and it talked about how even sworn enemies could agree on having I think it was in Beowulf, and then he talks about how two lords who are enemies, they could like literally swear frith to each other basically and have peace. So it's kind of what that's talking about. He's trying to keep the frith. He's trying to keep peace with the North, the Picts in Scotland and stuff. And they weren't having it. He was pagan. They were Christian, and they killed him for it. They ambushed all of him and his men, and 13 pagan men were slaughtered. Didn't even have a chance. So, yeah, that one stands really good for me because it's a smaller story, but it's a very beautiful one. Of even, I think it shows that you can have weakness. Like, things get kind of complicated. You know what I mean? But I think in the end, what matters is whenever you go to leave this world, you know what I mean? Being on the right path, you know what I mean? Being devoted, and I think dying for it. Having that whenever you die, knowing that you believe in it and stuff is where it's at. So, um, yeah, I like that one a lot. It's a good one of simply he didn't even fight. Like there was nothing really military about it. He simply was trying to go for peace negotiations, just to kind of clarify. I like that one too because it's not about like retaliation, Vikings wearing the Mjolnir and saying fuck Christians. It's like no, it's just a Anglo-Saxon king just trying to do negotiations to try to better relations with Scotland up in the north, who already hated the Anglo-Saxons, and he was killed for trying to do anything of that because of his religion. Um, so yeah, that was that one. I believe we have one more. Yeah, because time right now. What are we at?
54 minutes.
54. I think.
We was aiming for 30 to 40 minutes, but we kind of went over a little bit.
Yeah, we went a lot. We talked a while about Muslim shit. So, I think briefly touch on the last story for yours, and then we'll skip mine. I'll just say mine. If anybody doesn't know, just look up the story of Olaf Tryggvason and what he did to Norwegian people for conversion. But anyways, Tyler, I want you to say yours because yours was what I was saying was pretty touching.
Well, I don't really know much about this story, honestly, just because there's really not much that's said about it. But whenever Jesus was crucified, whenever they put him on the cross, there was two people that were crucified with him, one on either side of him. And one of the guys was mocking him, saying, if you are really the Son of God, have angels come down and save you and save us. But obviously, Jesus wouldn't do it because it was something that was necessary. It had to happen. The crucifixion did. And the other guy, he was a thief, and he was on the left side, I think. left or right. It doesn't really matter which side he was on, but he's beside him. And he said, "Lord, will you remember me?" Or something along those lines, kind of paraphrasing a little bit. And Jesus said, "Yes, today you will be with me in paradise."
Yeah, that was it. It's very short, but I kind of like that one. I don't know. Is like I said, it's not necessarily like martyr stuff. Is something touching even in the end. Like you're literally sitting there getting crucified. You don't got too long to. You're at your end, and in the face of death, you try to make a decision. You know what I mean? And um, I don't know. You try to fall on good things, I guess, in your death. And I don't know. I always like that one. That was just really sweet. And, that one always kind of it's a really good. Kind of hits you in the heart a little bit. So I like that one a lot. But yeah, we definitely went over. But to briefly touch on what this means, we kind of did it throughout it. But summarize this all up and tie it up real pretty. I think in this day and age, really look out for the signs of control. Follow what follow what your shit is. I mean, also be smart about it. I mean, like people did it for thousands of years. I mean, hell, even I mean, just even whenever Christianization happened, or this or that happened, or any kind of control happened, people still would do stuff indoors secretly. They would still do things because it's just the way of life. Um, and same thing with Christianity. Anytime persecutions happen, or people had to leave and stuff, and all the stories of the Bible, people had to leave and they're exiled. People still carry their traditions with them. You know what I mean? It's the same shit. Like, um, I think just be smart about it. Especially for people with families out there. But I think don't be afraid to die for it, because like if you really really think hard, because it's hard too, because there's not a gun to your face. But if you really think hard and you think about like those tingles you get, and that sometimes just that weird feeling where you're like, oh shit, like this is legit. If you really try to think about it, but then you try to imagine like a peace where it's just like, oh, it's just death. Like it really just is. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the ultimate, like that's it. You know what I mean? Like it's really like in those moments, like I feel like even if you were kind of like you didn't have the most impressive life, or maybe you were a piece of shit, I feel like in that moment, how you stand up to death and how you act in those final moments, I think that can, to me, I think that can almost like equal out or like negate everything. You know what I mean? Like, because you stood for something though in your end moments. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, you never saw Christ. There's nothing about Christ. Or I mean, hell, the thief. There's nothing about the thief crying or wailing like a baby. It was just simply like, all right, I'm about to die. Will you remember me? You know what I mean? And that's what he thought of in death. He died nobly. And um, and Frith, he wanted to restore. He wanted to die. He eventually converted back. He wanted to die. A Germanic pagan. King Radbad. He did of Phrygia. Said he'd rather burn in hell with his family, because he knows at least he'll be with his family, and he stayed believing in it as they did, instead of breaking it, and believing in something else. So, I think in like your last moments, you know what I mean? If you really think about it, like if you think about if you really could bring yourself to saving somebody when you know that guy who's trying to do shit has a gun or a knife, it's like, I think people notice that, you know what I mean? I think that's the ultimate thing that people notice, or like the divine notices is, oh, somebody died. How well did he die, or how did he die? What did he do? So, I don't know. I think just stay devoted. It doesn't have to be to as an extreme. Of course, times are different, but I think the biggest thing is just think about your last moments, and you know keep in mind, like for pagans out there, you have the afterlife, you have where your hall is, where you're gonna go, and then you reincarnate. Like you are accumulation of many souls, of many ancestors. They've all gone through this, and you're gonna go through this. Like everybody's gone through it. even for Christians, like everybody's died. You know what I mean? Like you're gonna fucking die. The Havamal says it. Cattle die, kinsmen die, you too shall die. But the one thing that never dies is the reputation of a good man. And then it says it again. It says the doom of man. You know, it's like everybody is. You know, so but the gods, the ancestors, God, you know, Christ, like they're. It's like it's all they're all watching you. You know what I mean? The one thing that's never gonna die that all of them will notice is your reputation. And I feel like those last moments. So I hope most of the people stayed watching to the end. This was kind of a wobbly, kind of odd episode because it was just thrown together, so it kind of was all over the place. But I kind of like the way this tied up. I think that was really powerful. You know, it kind of flowed out of me because I feel like the stories you said and the stories I said, even though they were two different kind of spectrums, obviously two different religions, and they were kind of clashing against each other in a sense, but different time periods, of course. They still had one message, and it was just even in death, staying devoted. So I think it's a good one for the ending. So hopefully people stay till the end to hear some of that. But um, Tyler, I want to ask you though, if I'd like you to maybe say something, or if you could say something, you know, for anybody out there like struggling, you know, maybe because you've been down that road and stuff, and you've struggled with things. Like any messages for people out there, you know, in terms of if you can give them a religious point of view of staying strong, you know what I mean, and um, you know, using the divine and using religion, or for Christians, using God to kind of give you that strength to stay on a path.
I'm trying to think.
God damn it, Cody! You threw me out there again.
Yeah, I don't do too good with thinking and being put on the spot. What am I doing? Uh, a message for people who are struggling, something, something.
Yeah, people are struggling. How would you, whether it's Christian or any religious standpoint, but maybe for Christians, you know, that's where your passion is right now. So maybe for Christians, a lot of people struggling, you know, what's some of the wisest or smartest wisdom that you could probably give to them and just things that could keep them upright, you know, and maybe get them out of a hole they're in terms of depression or anything, you know, or just struggling to stay focused, you know, like what are some things that you could say that you can get them back in mind and see the big picture of when they do die, how God will see them, you know, or Christ.
Shit, I don't know. Like I thought I knew where you was going with it at first. I was like, oh yeah, I mean, if somebody's struggling with like depression or something, yeah, I can talk about that because I've been there. I
Yeah.
already dealt with that whole thing,
Yeah.
so I can touch on that. But the rest of it, I don't really know.
Yeah. I guess if you can't, if not, no worries. But I guess if you can, think of that, the depression, but think of it in a um, you know, religious context, and, you know, of
Right.
you know things for habits and like you know I know you say you meditate like all these things, but things that you think God and you know like some things that God would probably say to that or Christ, things that could be strong words that came from Christ or God or just from you, you know, some things that influence you from Christ or God that could help somebody who does struggle with that because you know obviously imagine it's not really the most honorable way to go out no matter what religion, you know, and it sucks. You know what I mean? It's not shit talking anybody who struggles with it, of course not, you know, definitely not. But like it's just not labeled as the most honorable way and it's not a good way to go out, of course. It's really sad. So, you know, obviously Christ or God wouldn't be very proud of that, you know. They'd be very heartbroken or, you know, distraught over it. So I don't know, what are some words that could help somebody, not even just with depression, but somebody struggling to remain focused in the line of, you know, staying devoted to God or Christ?
Yeah. Uh, I'm trying so hard to think of something. I'm trying so hard. This is just hard for me.
Well, it is a pretty deep question. Don't worry. Um, hmm.
Do you have anything?
From a Christ or a God standpoint, because I mean, I covered the gun to the face thing. You know, if you could try to imagine that, try to imagine your death, but imagine, what it's going to be like after in some way, if you could imagine just like the peace that's going to be like, well, I got that out of the way, but at least I stood by what I said I would. Um, Maybe to wrap it up, I'll give an example of my grandfather. I love my grandfather. He's a Vietnam veteran, but a lot of them they're in Kentucky, so it's the Bible Belt. They grew up in a time. He was born in the 40s. He went to Vietnam. Like I said, everything through the Bible Belt. So he once told me it was probably when I was about a year to 2 years into being a Germanic pagan, and he said, what like what men say before they die, because he's a combat veteran. He's a combat engineer, so he's been shot 3 times. He's blown up twice. He's killed people. He's seen it. He's seen guys die, and I get it, of course. But he said, what people say when they die? They say, "Oh God," like as they're dying, they're screaming and they're saying, "Oh God." He's like, "You catch that? God." You know what I mean? So I think, um, I don't know. I think if I was to like wrap that up, I mean, I think from what I'm understanding, what he's saying, it's like in final moments, men pray, like they scream out to God and stuff. So I think, that shows whether it's out of fear or some men are very calm. You know what I mean? Some men are very calm. Some men don't say anything religious at all. Some men just, there's literally a quote I just found out about World War One. A German was writing about how he saw the Englishmen. He saw them as very brave, and literally an Englishman with his pipe, his legs were blown off. He's sitting down there, and the Germans go to treat him, out of like respect, and he just sits there and he just reaches for his pipe, clenches down on his pipe, and he just sits there and he rides it out until he dies. Just very calm, and everybody reacts to it differently, and I think even that in itself is very noble. But if it gets to the question of religion, I think like the people around you shape everything. So that's why for him, I don't really necessarily agree with it because he was trying to use that to say you're not going to be screaming Odin or whatever. But I think the part he's missing out on is, devotion. Like nobody in those days really knew much other than people who ventured out or like scholars. Nobody really ever remembered much about the Germanic gods. We're talking about the Bible Belt in the 40s and going into the 60s when guys were dying in Vietnam. But the one truth out of it is men did cling to religion when they died. They knew, oh shit. Some guys even commented like, oh shit, it's my time. Time to like say a prayer, say final goodbyes, and head up there. But I think the thing he's missing is devotion. For me, I want to have that strength, and I want to continue to have that strength to where, a guy, if I'm in a knife fight and he's slowly starting, he got the better on me, and he's trying to slowly try to put it into my chest or something like that. It's like I'm not gonna sit there and start spazzing out and freaking out, and start crying out. I mean, not even to say it in that way, but just to say like, oh, try to switch my religion because I doubt things. You know what I mean? I don't. I definitely don't think I would react that way. Of course, I know I wouldn't. But also, it's like um, I want to continue to have that devotion, and continue to think about it in my mind, to remain strong, to understand my own afterlife and what's going to happen, and so that way, even in my end moment, if that was to happen, I could die nobly, you know, even with the knife going into my chest. Um, I could be like, well, I'm going to some kind of hall, you know what I mean? Hopefully, I made my ancestors proud and I fought decently, or I stood up for what was right. And again, that's kind of going into a combat scenario. But in terms of suicide and people struggling, I think about those moments when you're struggling or you're thinking about doing something to hurt yourself or to end your life, I think like, really think about that, like how heartbroken, even just from a recent ancestor, like a father, mother, or grandparent, like how heartbroken they would be, to be looking from the afterlife and seeing you put like a gun to your head or a knife to yourself. you know Ancestors isn't just some spiritual thing. It's like they're really there, like they have knowledge of what you do, and it's kind of like, imagine them and what they're thinking and how heartbreaking that is, you know what I mean? um and for Christians, same thing with Christ, you know what I mean, or God, they're watching you, keep that devotion, you know think about them, you know what I mean, think about how proud you want to make them, because you're gonna die either way. But make it a hell of a life, you know what I mean, be the best version of you, and make them proud. So whenever you go to meet Christ, whenever you go to meet God, and you go to meet your family again, you know they'll be very proud of you for pushing through some of the shit you went through. So I think that was pretty a deep, fat motherfucking 20-minute explanation of going into that. But yeah, I think stay devoted, everyone. Definitely. But yeah, we rambled on for quite a bit now. We're gonna do our best to try to see if we can cram out a good old Los Gates enlisted episode right after this. We're gonna try to do our first one. We want to thank you very much for possibly sticking to the end of this one. This one was a last minute, but to me it was a very touching one. I think it could speak to a lot of people. And be on the lookout. Tyler's going to be reading through and brushing up on some of the Genesis chapters, and I
Oh
will be
God, I have a lot of reading to do. You got to read up on
so much reading.
Genesis again. I got to read up on this extreme devotion martyr book.
I got let's see if I got fucking Beowulf. Got to receive that. I got the Eddas. Trying to read through some sagas, and then also, of course, I want to read the beginning of Voluspa before I even do our Genesis versus the beginning of Voluspa, the Forge of the Worlds. That way, I know what I'm looking for, and I already have it in my head. So, same here. And then, of course, right now I'm a few pages into chapter 2, Honor, on culture of the Teutons. So, lots of reading, but I think it kind of is what makes it fun. We're gonna be at this for a while, doing all kinds of shit. So, without further ado, everyone, be on the lookout for that. And I want to thank you all for listening. So, wherever you're at, guten Morgen, guten Tag, guten Abend, guten Nacht. And yeah, got the whiskey tonight. I want to say Prost from everybody. It's basically St. Patty's Day still. So, I want to wish everyone a happy St. Patty's Day. And yeah, Prost. Goodbye, everyone.